She was 22 and homeless. No family, no plan, just $217 folded into the inside pocket of a coat she had worn for 2 winters straight. And with 5 of those dollars, she bought a condemned stone way station on a mountain pass in central Montana, 11 miles from the nearest stretch of pavement, in country so empty that the last person to sleep there had walked out good in the autumn of 1987. The county called it a liability. The state called it uninhabitable. But what nobody knew was that locked inside that old roadhouse in a cedar trunk that had not been opened in 35 years was something that would change the rest of her life. Before we go on, if stories like this one mean something to you, take a second and subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We never stop being amazed at how far these stories travel. Wren Calloway had always been the kind of person who watched the road instead of the house. Most children grow up looking inward, toward the warm rooms and the lit windows and the people who are supposed to stay. Wren grew up looking outward, toward the place where the road left town and went thin, and then disappeared into hills she could not name. She wanted to know where things went after they passed by. Her mother, Della, ran the front desk at a motor lodge on the edge of a small town outside Billings, a low brick building with 11 rooms and a flickering vacancy sign that buzzed all night like a trapped wasp. Della worked the desk from 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night, and on the nights when there was no one to watch the girl, she brought Wren with her and let her sit in the office behind the counter with a coloring book and a cold glass bottle of root beer. Wren never colored. She watched the door. People came through that motor lodge from everywhere. Truckers and seed salesmen, families pulling horse trailers, a man once who was walking across the whole country with a wooden cart, a woman with a parrot under her coat, 2 brothers driving their dead father's ashes to a lake in Idaho. They came in out of the dark, paid for a room, and in the morning they were gone again, carried off down the same road they had arrived on, back into the country that swallowed everything whole. Wren wanted to follow every one of them. She wanted to know what the road looked like from inside the car as the lights of the town fell away behind you. She used to press her forehead to the cold office window and watch the taillights shrink to nothing. She was a good student when she bothered, and she rarely bothered. She read books about overland expeditions and lighthouse keepers, and people who lived alone in fire towers, and counted the seasons by the migration of birds. She kept a creased road atlas under her bed and traced the thin gray secondary roads with one finger, the ones that did not lead to cities, the ones that ended in a dotted line and a single warning word like impassable. Her mother found her doing it one night, lying on the floor in the lamp glow, with the atlas open across her knees, and asked what she was looking for. Wren said she was looking for the place that nobody else wanted. Della laughed, soft and tired, and told her there was no money in wanting what nobody wanted. Wren said she wasn't looking for money. She was 8 years old when she said it, and she meant it, and she would still mean it 14 years later, standing in the snow with a deed in her pocket. Her father was not part of the picture and never had been. He had left before Wren was old enough to keep a memory of him, and her mother spoke of him so rarely that the man became less a person than a kind of weather that had passed through once, years before Wren was born, and left nothing behind but her. It was Della and Wren, and it had always only ever been Della and Wren, the 2 of them in a rented duplex with a yard, the size of a parking space and a screen door, that never once latched right in all the years they lived behind it. Della died when Wren was 20. It was her heart, and it was sudden, and it happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in February, in the kitchen, between the lunch dishes and the start of her motel shift, with a dish towel still slung over her shoulder. Wren was the one who found her. There was no long illness to brace against, no hospital chairs, no slow goodbye in a quiet room. There was a woman alive at 1 o'clock, and a woman gone by 3, and a daughter standing in a kitchen that smelled of coffee, and the orange her mother had been peeling, holding the phone in her hand, unable for one long suspended moment to remember what number you were supposed to dial when the worst thing had already finished happening. After the funeral, there was nothing left to hold her in place. The duplex was rented and the landlord wanted it back by the end of the month. The car had a note on it that Wren could not pay, and a man came and took it on a flatbed on a gray Thursday while she watched from the curb. The savings, what little there had ever been, went to the funeral home and the cremation and a small granite headstone that Wren bought even though there was no plot to set it on. because she could not stand the thought of her mother having no marker anywhere in the whole wide world. She kept the stone in a closet for a while. Then she could not afford the closet either. She packed everything she still owned into one duffel bag and a backpack, and walked out of the duplex for the last time on a cold morning in March, and she did not look back at it, because there was nothing back there she wanted to carry forward. For almost 2 years after that, she lived in motion. She picked sugar beets near Sydney and tart cherries near Flathead Lake. She washed dishes at a Roadhouse outside Bozeman in exchange for a folding cot in the storeroom and 2 meals a day. She rode buses through the dark across 3 states, learning to sleep sitting upright with her bag chained to her ankle. And one summer, the best of the 2 years, she worked trail crew for an outfit that contracted with the Forest Service, swinging a Pulaski and hauling rock and rebuilding washed-out tread, sleeping in a canvas wall tent at a spike camp 4 miles from the nearest road. The pay was $9.50 an hour. She would have done it for nothing. That summer was the only stretch in 2 years when the ground under her felt, even a little, like it belonged to her. But seasonal work ends when the season does. By the time she was 22, she had slept in 19 different beds that were not hers, and she had learned the particular loneliness of being the one who is always leaving in the morning, the one who never gets to be the light in the window that someone else is driving toward. She was tired all the way down to the bone. She did not want a lease or a credit check or an apartment with a stranger snoring on the other side of a wall thin as paper. She wanted somewhere remote and difficult and hers, somewhere no one else had wanted, because the things no one else wanted were the only things a person with $217 could ever hope to afford. She wanted, just once in her life, to be the one who stayed. If you have ever wanted a place so badly that you could feel it before you ever found it, stay with us, because what Ren found next is the whole reason this story is worth telling. She found the listing on a public library computer in Livingston. On a cold, bright afternoon at the end of April, scrolling through the county's surplus and tax foreclosure pages, because she had learned in 2 hard years that the cheapest land in America is the land that nobody can figure out how to use. Counties end up owning strange things. They foreclose on properties for unpaid back taxes and then cannot sell them, and the parcels sit on the books year after year, dragging down the ledger until some clerk finally lists them for almost nothing just to be rid of the bookkeeping. Most of what scrolled past Ren that afternoon was true junkland. A floodlot you could not build on, a sliver of old right-of-way 9 feet wide, a 1/4 acre stranded under a high-tension power line. And then she found the way station. The listing called it a former roadhouse and county road maintenance structure, stone and log construction, circa 1911, sitting on a 3-4 acre private in holding surrounded on every side by national forest, near the summit of a gap the records called Wayfarer Pass, in the southern end of a range the locals called the Crazies. It had been a freight rest stop in the wagon days, then a snow survey and road crew shelter through the middle of the century, and then, the listing said in that flat clerical way, it had been privately occupied under an old caretaker arrangement until 1987, after which it had reverted to the county for unpaid taxes and sat empty ever since. It had been offered at tax sale 11 separate times since 1994 with no buyer. The current asking price was $5. The catch, and there is always a catch, was everything else about it. The way station was 11 miles from the nearest paved road. 7 of those miles were on a county dirt road. The listing warned was not maintained and impassable from roughly November through May. The last 4 miles were on a closed-out wagon grade that had washed out in 2 places and was, the listing noted with bureaucratic finality, suitable for foot or stock travel only. There was no power and no line within 14 miles to bring it from. There was no certified well, there was no septic, no telephone, no road service, no mail. The structure was condemned. The county would sell it strictly as is, with no warranty of any kind, to anyone foolish enough to put their name on the paper. Ren read the listing 4 times through. Then she pulled up the topographic quadrangle for the area and found the parcel. A small private square stranded in a wide green sea of national forest, and she traced the old wagon grade up to the pass with 1 finger. The exact same way she had traced gray roads in her atlas as a girl on the floor of a rented kitchen. She measured the distance. She read the contour lines. She found where the creek ran below the pass and where the slope faced south and would melt clear of snow first and where the timber would break the worst of the wind. She sat at that library computer until a staff member came to tell her, gently, that they were locking the doors. And by then Wren had already decided. The way she decided everything, quietly and completely, and without telling a single soul, because there was no longer anyone left in the world to tell. It took her 9 days to do the paperwork by mail and a money order for the recording fee, and another 2 weeks for the deed to come back stamped and registered with her name on the line. Wren Calloway, owner. She sat on a bus station bench and read her own name on the document for a long, long time. It was the first thing she had ever owned in her life that could not be packed into a bag and carried away from her. She spent $94 of what was left on supplies in Livingston. Rice and dried beans and rolled oats and salt, coffee cooking oil, a coil of half-inch rope, a box of long-burning candles, a second hatchet to go with the one she has carried, a roll of heavy poly sheeting, and a tube of construction adhesive. She loaded 51 pounds of it onto a borrowed pack frame and caught a ride as far as the turnoff with a hay hauler who told her, kindly and to her face, that she was out of her mind. Then she shouldered the pack and started walking. It was the 3rd week of May. The snow was off the south slopes, the creeks were running high and brown with melt, and the air at the trailhead smelled of wet earth and crushed sage and that cold mineral smell the high country carries even in spring, the smell of stone that has only just stopped being snow. The first 7 miles on the dirt road took her the better part of a full day. The road climbed in long switchbacks through stands of Douglas fir and lodgepole pine, crossing the creek twice on culverts that had half washed away, and with every turn the valley fell farther behind her and opened wider, until at last she could see 40 miles of it laid out blue and hazy below. She stopped at the creek to filter water and eat half a sleeve of crackers and rest her shoulders, which had not carried 51 pounds since the trail crew, and had not forgotten how it felt. She passed a county road sign faded so pale she could not read a single word of it. She passed an old cattle guard grown thick with grass and the gray standing skeletons of a burn from some fire decades gone, the dead snags pale as bone against the brilliant new green coming up around their feet. She camped that night where the dirt road ended and the wagon grade began, in a flat spot beside the loud creek, and ate cold beans straight out of the pot, and watched the stars come on above the dark ridge one at a time until the whole sky was crowded edge to edge with them. It froze hard before midnight. Wren slept in her thermals inside her mother's old wool sleeping bag, the one thing she had carried unbroken through 2 years of leaving and would not have traded for anything on earth, and she tucked her water bottle into the bag beside her so it would not freeze. And she slept the heavy, dreamless sleep of a body that has done honest work all day. When she woke at first light, there was frost stiff and white on the outside of the bag, and her breath hung in clouds in the still air, and the eastern sky and the dark teeth of the pass was the exact color of a peeled peach. If you are still with us, what she walked into the next morning is the part that gives me chills every single time I tell it. Subscribe now if you want to see how it ends. The last 4 miles climbed the old wagon grade up to the pass, and even ruined, it was a beautiful piece of work. It had been cut into the side of the mountain at a grade gentle enough for a 6-horse freight team to pull a loaded wagon, and it was retained on the downhill side by dry-laid stone walls that men had fitted together by hand more than 100 years before Wren was born, and those walls still held. In 2 places the grade had washed clean off the mountain, and Wren had to pick her way across the raw scar on foot, kicking steps into the loose scree, using her trekking poles for balance over the long drop. The pass itself stood at 7,040 feet, a bare notch between 2 rounded summits where the wind came through steady and cold no matter the season, and when she finally topped out into it, she stopped and turned and looked back the way she had come, and then forward the way she was going, and in neither direction was there a single thing by any living human hand. Just rock and timber, and running water and sky, and the long blue shadow of the morning. Just the whole turning world, and her standing in the middle of it. The way station sat just below the pass on the far side, on a level bench of ground above the creek, in a clearing where the grass was already greening between the dark walls of spruce. Wren stopped at the edge of the clearing and did not move for a long while. It was bigger than she had pictured, and far more beautiful and far more ruined. The lower walls were stone, gray granite fieldstone laid up in lime mortar, fully 2 feet thick at the base, the kind of wall a person builds to stand against 100 winters of snow sliding off a mountain. The upper story was log, squared timbers gone dark with a century of weather, the chinking fallen out in long pale gaps. The roof was steep-pitched metal, rusted to the color of dried blood, sagging in one bay where a snow load had finally won the argument, but standing. A long covered porch ran the full length of the south face, its posts hand-hewn from whole logs, 3 of the 7 leaning out of true. And over the door, on a single plank weathered to silver, someone had carved letters a long time ago, and the years had nearly erased them, but in the low, slanting morning light Wren could just make out what they had once said. They said, "All welcome." She walked across the wet clearing and the grass dragged at her boots, and a meadowlark sprang up out of it ahead of her, pouring out its long liquid song into the cold air. The porch boards groaned and gave under her weight, soft with rot at the edges, still sound through the middle. The door was held shut by a hasp and a padlock the county had screwed on years before, and the padlock had rusted into one solid orange lump, but the wood of the jamb had gone so soft with rot that when Wren set her shoulder against the door and pushed, steady and hard and patient, the whole hasp tore free of the rotten wood, with a sound like a root letting go of the ground, and the door swung slowly inward into the dark. The smell came out to meet her first. Cold stone and old wood smoke soaked deep into the timbers over 100 years of fires, and dust and the faint sweet rot of mouse, and under all of it, the clean mineral smell of a room that has been sealed against the weather for 35 years. Wren stood in the open doorway and let her eyes find their way into the dark. Then she stepped inside. It was one great room, with a stone fireplace at the far end big enough to stand a child upright inside, blackened all the way up the throat by a century of fires. The floor was wide pine planks, gray with dust but solid as bedrock underfoot. A long trestle table ran straight down the middle of the room, the kind of table built to feed an entire freight crew at once, with a bench down each side worn pale and smooth where 1,000 pairs of elbows had rested. Along one wall stood a cook stove, cast iron, an old majestic range surface rusted but whole, its firebox door hanging open like a mouth. Along the opposite wall, a row of bunks stacked 3 high, the rough frames still standing, a few of them still strung with rotting rope lacing. There was a dish dresser holding a cracked enamel basin and a stack of tin plates furred gray with dust. There was a rocking chair set by the cold hearth, and there was a felt hat, battered and shapeless, hanging on a wooden peg by the door, exactly where its owner had last hung it. Everything was as it had been left. Nobody had taken a single thing. Nobody in 35 years had even come far enough to look. The place had been too remote and too poor, and too much trouble for too long, and so it had simply waited, holding its breath in the dark, for someone willing to walk 11 miles uphill to find it. Wren moved through the room slowly, touching nothing at first, only looking. On the mantel over the great fireplace stood a row of small objects, the kind of private museum a person assembles across a long life in one place. A worn horseshoe, a bent railroad spike, a child's single shoe worn through at the toe, a brass marching compass with the glass cracked across. A photograph faded almost to white of a young man in an army uniform smiling at someone the camera could not see. A glass jar of mismatched buttons. And at the very end of the mantel a small leather-bound book swollen thick with old damp, the word ledger stamped into the cover in gold gone gray with age. She did not open it yet. She would, but not that day. That first night, Wren did not light a fire in the great hearth, though there was split wood enough stacked in the back wall to burn warm for a month. She did not feel, yet, that she had earned the right to. She slept instead on the floor near the door, rolled in her mother's wool bag, listening to the old building talk to itself in the dark, the small tickings and groanings of ancient wood, letting go of the day's last faint warmth, the wind working its fingers into the gaps in the chinking, and once, far off, the long coughing scream of a mountain lion somewhere down the valley, a sound that stood every hair up on her arms, and made her smile in the dark anyway, because it meant she was somewhere truly wild at last, somewhere truly and finally hers. If a place has ever felt like it was waiting for you, you already understand exactly what Wren felt that first night. Hit subscribe and tell us about it down in the comments. We read every single one. She spent the first weeks making the way station fit to live in, and the work was the hardest of her life, and she loved every aching hour of it. She swept 35 years of dust and mouse nest and pack rat midden out of the great room, hauling it out a full basin at a time and dumping it well past the spring. She chinked the worst of the gaps in the log walls. With mortar, she mixed by hand in a bucket from a sack of lime she carried up over the pass on her own back, a trip that took her 2 full days because she could only manage 40 pounds of it at a time, and had to cash half and come back. She cleared 100 years of hardened creosote out of the great chimney by tying a weighted gunny sack to her rope and working it up and down the flue until her arms gave out, and her face and hair were black as a collier's. She tarred and patched the sagging bay of the roof with the poly sheeting and the construction adhesive, crawling out onto the steep rusted metal in the gray early mornings when the dew made it slick and treacherous, telling herself the whole time that this was only a temporary fix and that she would do it properly come full summer, and knowing even as she said it that she would keep that promise. She found the spring 50 yards north of the building, exactly where the lay of the old grade had led her to expect it, a stone-lined box someone had set into the hillside more than a century before, the water rising up out of it clear and cold, and tasting faintly of iron and snowmelt and the dark inside of the mountain itself. She found a root cellar dug into the slope behind the building, its plank door fallen but its chamber dry and sound, cool and dark and perfect for keeping the little she had. She found hung carefully along the back wall of the lean-to not just firewood but tools, crosscut saw, a broadaxe, a draw knife, a froe for splitting shakes, a whole wall of implements oiled and hung by a careful hand and touched only lightly by rust in all the years since, as though their owner had stepped out fully expecting to come back. She found a kitchen garden long gone to wild grass, its split rail fence collapsed flat, and when she knelt and pulled the grass, she uncovered rhubarb and horseradish and a knot of small old onions still faithfully coming up after 35 untended summers. The sight of those stubborn living things, keeping a dead man's garden, going long after the man himself was gone, put a lump in her throat she could not have explained to anyone. The place taught her the way Asa had promised it would, in the only language it knew, which was the language of consequence. It taught her that wood you split in July burns warm in January, and wood you put off splitting does not burn at all. It taught her that water carried up from the spring in the dark is heavier than water carried up in the light, and that a roof patched poorly leaks exactly over the bunk. She learned the weather of the pass before she learned anything else, because the weather of the pass would kill a careless person and had no patience for excuses. She learned to read the long mare's tail clouds that meant the storm was 3 days out, and the hard brassy color the sky went the morning before a real blow, and the particular hush that fell over the clearing, the birds gone silent all at once, in the last half hour before the snow. She made mistakes that first season, and the mountain charged her for every one of them in cold and sweat and lost sleep. And she paid the bills without complaint, because she understood at last that this was what she had wanted since she was 8 years old. Not ease, consequence. A life where the things she did mattered, and the ground under her kept the account. She walked out to town and back every 2 weeks that first summer, 11 miles down and 11 miles up, and the walk became a kind of liturgy she came to need. She would leave before dawn and reach the turnoff by midday and ride into Livingston, whatever rancher or hay truck or fence crew happened along, and she would do her small shopping, and she would eat one hot meal at a diner on Main Street called the Stockman, run by a heavyset woman named Donna Reyes, who wore silver rings on every finger and had a laugh you could hear clear out on the sidewalk. By Wren's third visit, Donna had her order down without being asked. Chicken fried steak, eggs over hard, and coffee she kept topping off without a word. By the fifth visit, Donna had started setting aside the day-old bread and the bruised produce in a paper sack she left waiting by the register, and she would not take so much as a dime for it, and she would not be argued with about it either. Wren learned slowly to stop arguing and just say thank you. It was Donna who first said the name out loud. Wren had been telling her, across the worn yellow formica of the counter, about the place she had bought, and Donna had gone suddenly still with the coffee pot held up in the air, and she had said, very quietly, "Honey, you bought Asa's place." Wren said she didn't know whose place it had ever been. She said the listing had only called it a waste station. Donna set the pot down on the burner. "It's a Hartwell," she said. "Lord above, there's a name I haven't spoken in 30 years. And she looked at Wren a long moment, and something in her broad weathered face shifted and softened and opened, and she walked over and turned the door sign from open to close-list, even though it was the dead middle of the afternoon, and she poured 2 fresh cups and sat herself down across from Wren in the corner booth, and she said, "Sit. I am going to tell you about the man whose roof you have been sleeping under." But that part, the part where Wren learned exactly who Asa Hartwell had been, comes a little further along in the story. First, she had to find what he had left behind. And if you want to know what was sealed inside that cedar trunk, subscribe right now, because we are getting very close. It was the long rains of June that finally drove Wren to open the trunk. A cold storm settled down over the pass and sat there for 4 solid days, raining steady and gray, and there was nothing to do but keep the great fire fed and wait it out. On the second afternoon of it, restless and bored and at last feeling that the place was enough hers to go properly through it, Wren began to truly explore. She climbed the ladder to the loft over the bunk end of the room, a low cramped space tucked up under the rafters that she had not yet had any reason to visit, and there, far back under the eave, beneath a moth-eaten gray wool blanket and a stiff coil of old harness leather, she found the cedar trunk. It was a beautiful old thing, a steamer trunk banded in brass gone green with the years, the cedar lining still faintly fragrant when she lifted the lid and the smell rose up to meet her. It was not locked. Whoever had closed it last had simply latched it and walked away and never come back. Wren knelt under the low rafters, with the rain drumming hard on the metal roof 2 feet above her head, and she opened it. The first thing inside was the ledgers. Not 1 but 11 of them, leather-bound account books, the kind a careful shopkeeper keeps, stacked in strict order, each one labeled along the spine in a slanting, old-fashioned hand with a span of years. 1949 through 1952. 1953 through 1956. On and on down the stack, 11 volumes in all, the final one ending in 1987. Wren lifted the top book out and opened it across her knees, expecting accounts, sums, columns of money owed and money paid. That was not what it was at all. It was a guest book. It was 38 years of every living soul who had crossed over Wayfarer Pass and stopped at the way station, written down faithfully by hand. The date they came. Their name when they offered one. Where they had come from, and where they were bound. And a line about them, sometimes only 3 or 4 words, sometimes half a page, about who they were and what it was they had needed. A sheep camp tender named Vasquez snowed in for 3 days in November of 1951, given the south bunk and fed hot and sent on with a sack of jerky. A young couple eloping over the pass to find in White Sulphur Springs in the spring of 1958, married. In the eyes of God in that very room with Asa standing as their only witness, given the loft for the night and a jar of huckleberry preserves as a wedding gift. A traveling drummer whose Model A had thrown a connecting rod on the grade, kept 11 days while the part came up by freight from Billings, who had no money to pay, and so repaired the cook stove instead. And Wren felt the cold go straight down her spine when she understood that it was that very stove, that exact repaired stove, that she had been cooking her beans and boiling her coffee on every single day since spring. She read until the gray daylight failed, and then she lit a candle and read on by its small, steady flame. There were hundreds of them. Across the 11 volumes there were thousands. Hunters and herders and runaways and government surveyors. A country doctor riding hard to a ranch where a child was burning up with fever. A woman walking away from a husband in the winter of 1959 who stayed 2 weeks and left in the early spring with her chin up. A war veteran who came back twice a year for 10 years straight and slept in the loft and spoke to almost no one and was always, every time, welcome. And beside nearly none of them was there any mention of money taken. And where money appeared in the book at all, it was always Asa giving it and never once receiving it. $1 pressed into a man's hand so he could buy himself a real meal down in town. $2 to a half-grown boy walking home from a logging camp that had cheated him of his pay. The same handful of words came back again and again all through the slanting hand, like a refrain, like the chorus of a hymn. Sent on warm, sent on fed, sent on with what he needed. Beneath the stacked ledgers, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, were the letters. Hundreds of them, tied off in bundles with butcher's string, and Wren understood as she untied the first bundle that these were the other half of it. These were the answers. These were the letters that people had sent back. Thank you letters, mostly, in every hand from elegant flowing copperplate to the painful block printing of someone who had barely learned to write at all, postmarked from every corner of the country and a few from clear overseas. A man writing from Oregon in 1963 to say that he had named his firstborn son Asa. A woman writing in the winter of 1971 to say that the single night she had spent at the way station, the night she had come over the pass running from something she did not name, had been the night she decided not to die after all, and that she was writing now Tao, 8 years on, from a warm kitchen of her own, with a family of her own around her, alive. Ren read that one letter 3 times through in the candlelight. Then she set it down very carefully on the cedar floor of the loft, and she pressed the heels of both hands hard against her eyes. And she sat there a long while in the dark, with the rain coming down, because there are some things a person has to set down before they can pick anything else up. And at the very bottom of the trunk, underneath the ledgers and underneath the bundled letters, there were 2 last things. The first was a flat tin biscuit box, surprisingly heavy, and when Ren worked the lid off, she found money inside it. Old paper bills, 5s and 10s and 20s, bound up in stacks with paper bands, and a single sheet of paper folded on top in that same slanting hand. The bills came to $26,140. The note on top read, "This is not mine. It belongs to the door. Whoever keeps the door open, keep this for the keeping of it." Coffee and lamp oil and mortar all cost money, even when welcome itself is free. The second thing was a letter folder, and inside the folder was a letter, typed, on the letterhead of a lawyer down in Big Timber, dated the 9th of October, 1987, and clipped behind it a single stiff page that bore the embossed seal of the county and the inked stamp of the recorder's office. Ren read the lawyer's letter through first, and then she read the recorded page, and then she read both of them again to be certain she had understood, and, when she was certain, she went very still under the low rafters, because she understood that Asa Hartwell, a man who had owned almost nothing and given away nearly everything, had left behind one last thing, and that it was the exact one thing that would, decades later and from beyond the grave, save this place from the only kind of people who would ever try to take it. But before any of that, there was the letter Asa had written to whoever came next. It was the last thing folded into the folder, in his own slanting hand, and Ren read it by candlelight that night with the rain still falling hard on the roof, and this is what it said. To whoever finds this and decides to stay. My name is Asa Hartwell. I came over this pass in the fall of 1949 with everything I owned loaded on one horse, looking for a place where a man who had seen the war could be quiet, and I found this old roadhouse standing empty on its bench above the creek, and I stayed 38 years. I did not own much of it at the start. The county let me live here as caretaker in trade for keeping the road open, and the snow stakes set every fall, and over the long years they sold me the parcel for the back taxes that were owed on it. And so in time it became mine, though I will tell you honestly I never once felt that it truly was. A place like this does not belong to a man. A man belongs to it for a while, and then he hands it on to the next one. I want to tell you the one single thing I learned in 38 years on this pass, because it is the only thing I am truly sure of. And it is this: everyone is traveling. Every soul that ever came through that door was on their way from one hard thing toward another hard thing. And nearly every one of them was carrying more than you could see on them. And the only thing any of us could ever really do for another was to keep the door open and the kettle hot and ask nothing at all in return. That is the whole of it. That is everything I know after a lifetime up here. The world is forever full of people telling you to look after your own and let the rest fend for themselves. I am telling you the exact opposite, and I have earned the right to tell you. Look after the stranger, because there is no such thing as a stranger. There is only a person whose name you have not yet written down in the book. I am old now, and my heart has gone poor, and I do not believe I will see another winter come, and I am writing this down, so that whoever comes after me will know what this place is for. It is not a house. It is a door. Keep it open. The money in the tin is for the keeping of the door and not for you. Though if you have come up here as poor as I once came, I will not begrudge you a cup of its coffee now and again. The papers in the folder will matter someday. And when that day comes, you will know it. A clever man once tried to take this place away from me for reasons of his own, and I made certain, with the help of one honest lawyer, that no clever man would ever be able to take it from anyone again. Read those papers carefully. Keep them safe and keep them where they can be found. Take care of the roof because the West Bay will go first. The spring will never once fail you, not in the driest August. The garden asks of you only that you pull the grass. And when someone comes over that pass cold and tired and afraid, the way you came, the way I came, the way every one of us came, open the door to them and write down their name in the book and send them on warm. That is all of it. The mountain will teach you the rest, the way it taught me. Asa Hartwell, Wayfarer Pass. October 1987. Ren folded the letter closed and held it in both her hands and looked across the dark loft, And down at the door below, the door over which a hand long since turned to dust had carved the words, "All welcome," more than 100 years before either she or Asa had been born into the world. And she said out loud, to no one and to everyone, "All right then, I'll keep it open. If that letter caught you the way it caught me, do me one favor and subscribe, and stay right here with us, because the clever man that Asa warned about in his letter, he had a grandson. And the grandson was about to come up the pass." The next time Wren walked into town, she sat down in the corner booth at the Stockman, and Donna Reyes told her the rest of it. The parts that the ledgers themselves did not hold. The parts you can only know if you were there to live them. Donna's own mother, it turned out, had been the young woman who walked away from a husband in the bitter winter of 1959 and stayed 2 weeks at the way station and left in the spring with her chin up. "Asa Hartwell saved my mother's life," Donna said, turning her coffee cup slowly in its saucer with her ringed fingers, and he never once, not one single time, made her feel like she owed him a thing for it. She always said that was the rare part. She said plenty of people in this world will help you when you are down. Not so many can help you and still let you keep your pride at the same time. Asa could. He did it for her, and he did it for 40 years of strangers, and he died with $26,000 in a tin that he thought of as belonging to a door. Donna's mother had named her daughter after the place. Donna was short for Donatella, and it had begun as a private joke between her parents, a name that meant a thing given, a gift, a child of the giving. Donna had carried that name her whole life, without ever fully feeling the weight of it, and only now, telling it across the booth to a homeless girl who had bought Asa's roof for $5, did the meaning of her own name finally come all the way home to her, and her eyes shone, and she had to look out the window at the street for a moment before she could go on. And there were others around Livingston who remembered him. The old man who ran the hardware store, whose own father had been the traveling drummer who fixed the cook stove. The retired schoolteacher whose great-aunt had been married in the great room in the spring of 1958 and had kept the empty huckleberry preserve jar on her windowsill until the day she died. The county clerk, near retirement now, who as a young woman fresh in the job had typed up the very documents that sat in Asa's leather folder, and who remembered the lawyer down in Big Timber who had drawn them, and remembered, more importantly, exactly why he had drawn them. Word went all around Livingston that summer. The slow, sure-way word travels in a small town that a young woman had bought Asa Hartwell's old place and was living up there alone and keeping it the way Asa had kept it, and people Wren had never once met began to nod to her on the street. A rancher she did not know left a wrapped side of beef for her at the stockman with her name on the butcher paper. An old woman she had never spoken to pressed a jar of chokecherry jelly into her hands outside the post office and walked away without ever giving her name. And Wren began, without ever quite deciding to keep the door open. It started with a pair of thru-hikers who came over the pass in the second week of July, footsore and out of water, and squinting at the strange stone building like a mirage. And Wren filled their bottles at the cold springs and sat them down at the great trestle table and fed them lunch, and would not take their money, and watched them go on down the grade, lighter than they had come up it. She wrote their two names in a fresh ledger she had bought down in town, the 12th volume, the first new one since 1987. Then there was a backcountry hunting guide, scouting elk in the high meadows in August. Then a Forest Service trail crew that adopted the way station at the Zubs for a hard week of tread work and left her a new axe head in thanks when they pulled out. Then a solo rider on a sure-footed mule who had heard, somehow, all the way down in Wyoming, that there was a place on a pass-up in the Crazies where a person could get a hot meal and a dry bunk, and nobody would ask them for one thing in return. Wren wrote every one of them down in the 12th book. Sent on fed. And she found, to her own quiet astonishment, that the loneliest person she had ever been in her whole life was somehow becoming a person that other people came up a mountain to find. If you have ever been on the receiving end of that kind of kindness, the kind that lets you keep your pride, tell us about it in the comments below. And if you have not yet subscribed, this is the moment, because here is exactly where it turns. The man came up the pass on a four-wheeler in the second week of September, and that single fact told Wren everything she needed to know about him before he ever opened his mouth, because the old wagon grade was washed out in two places, and no machine could cross it, and so he had been forced to abandon the four-wheeler below the second washout and walk the last half-mile on foot. He arrived in the clearing red-faced and breathing hard and furious about it. Dressed in pressed slacks and clean leather shoes built for a carpeted office and not for a mountain. His name was Garrett Voss, and he handed Wren a heavy cream business card that said he was the director of acquisitions for a company called Summit Vista Holdings, and he looked at the old stoneless way station the exact way a man looks at a problem he has been sent to solve. He was polite at first, in the smooth, practiced way of men who have learned somewhere along the line that politeness is only another tool. He told her that Summit Vista was developing a private backcountry retreat down on the forest land below the pass, a luxury operation, hand-built cabins, and a lodge and helicopter access, the kind of place where men like the ones he worked for paid $10,000 a week to feel for a few days as though they were roughing it. He told her that her parcel, her 3-4 useless condemned acres, was the only piece of private land controlling the historic access route into the entire valley, and that without it, his company's whole plan had a hole punched straight through the middle of it. And then he told her, smiling the entire time, that he was authorized to offer her $400,000 for it, cash, that very day. Wren Calloway was 22 years old. She had 46 left in a coffee tin under the bunk, and a deed to a condemned building, and a wool sleeping bag that had belonged to her dead mother. And a man in clean leather shoes had just offered her $400,000. She stood on the porch beneath the silvered plank that read all welcome, and she heard her own voice say, very quietly, no. Voss's smile did not move, but his eyes did. He had plainly never once, in all his career, considered that the answer to $400,000 could simply be no. He explained again, more slowly now, the way a patient man explains a thing to a slow child, exactly what that kind of money could do for a girl in her particular situation. Then he began, still smiling, to lay out the other side of it. He pointed out that the building was condemned, that the county could at any time compel her to bring it up to code, or else condemn it outright and be done with her. He pointed out that the access road was a county liability they would likely be glad to close. He pointed out, his voice never once losing its pleasant edge, that there were 100 quiet ways a remote parcel like this one could become a great deal more trouble than it was worth for a young woman living all alone in the middle of nowhere with winter coming on. He never once called any of it a threat. He did not have to. He set his cream business card down on the porch rail, and he turned and walked back down the grade to his stranded four-wheeler, and Wren stood and watched him go and felt the old cold fear come rising up in her. The fear she had carried since the morning she walked out of her mother's empty duplex with everything she owned strapped to her back. The fear of being, always and forever, the person that things get taken from. And then she remembered the folder. If you didn't see what's coming next, neither did Garrett Voss. Subscribe and stay right here, because the way an old dead caretaker handled this man is the best part of the whole story. She rode into town the very next day, and she did not go to the stockman first. She went straight to the county recorder's office, and she laid Asa Hartwell's papers down flat on the counter, and the old clerk near retirement put on her reading glasses and bent over them. And slowly, the woman began to smile. Because here is precisely what Asa Hartwell had done in October of 1987, with the help of one honest lawyer down in Big Timber back when an earlier clever man, Garrett Voss's own grandfather as it would turn out, a land speculator who had tried to buy up the whole pass for a mining scheme that never came to anything, had first come sniffing around the place. Asa had recorded a permanent covenant against the deed. The lawyer's letter called it the Wayfarer's Covenant, and it was the kind of restriction that lawyers say runs with the land, meaning it binds the land itself and not merely the person who happens to own it, and it follows that land down through every sale and every inheritance, and even through a tax foreclosure forever, attaching itself to every owner who ever comes after. The covenant did two things, and they were simple, and they were ironclad. First, it restricted the parcel in perpetuity to use as a public shelter for travelers, and nothing else. And second, it granted to the public a permanent right of passage over the old wagon grade, where it crossed the parcel, so that the road across Asa's land could never lawfully be closed to anyone ever. In plain words, the way station could never be anything but a way station. The road across it could never be locked against the public, and the parcel could never be sold to, or used for a private development that shut the public out of the pass. The covenant had been recorded properly against the deed in 1987. When Asa died that same autumn with no living heirs, the parcel had eventually gone back to the county for the unpaid taxes, and the county had eventually sold it for $5 to a homeless girl named Wren Calloway. But the covenant had ridden quietly, along with the land through every step of that, exactly as Asa and his honest lawyer had built it to do. It bound the county while the county held it. It bound Wren now, and Wren was glad down to her bones to be bound by it. And it utterly destroyed any value the parcel could ever hold for Summit Vista Holdings, because the one single thing a $10,000 a week private retreat can never abide is a public right-of-way and a free open shelter for any wanderer sitting square in the middle of its only gate. Asa Hartwell had owned almost nothing in his life and had given away nearly all of it, and the one true piece of cleverness in his whole long quiet existence he had spent not on protecting himself, and not on growing his money, but on making certain that no rich man would ever be able to close the door that he had spent 38 years of his life holding open. He had reached forward across 35 years, and his own death, and a girl he would never live to meet, and he had defended Wren Calloway before she had even been born. The clerk made Wren a full set of certified copies, every page stamped and sealed, and the retired schoolteacher who sat on the board of the County Historical Society heard about it. Within the hour, the way news moves in a small town, and within the same week she had the Old Way Station entered onto the State Register of Historic Places, which wrapped a second hard layer of armor around it that no developer alive could ever cut through. When Garrett Voss came back up the pass on foot this time, having at least learned that much, Wren met him standing on the porch and handed him the certified copy of the Wayfarer's Covenant and watched him read it through. She watched the smooth, easy confidence drain out of his face line by line as he came to understand that there was nothing here to buy, that there never had been anything here to buy, that an old caretaker dead and gone for 35 years had reached up out of his grave and locked this gate against his grandfather, and against him, and against every cajon the money like them, and then that no amount of money like forever, then no amount of money on Kofi on earth could pick a lock like that. He had climbed the mountain certain that everything in the world has its price. He went back downtown, it having finally met the one thing that does not. He tried for a while longer in the way of his kind, because men like Garrett Voss do not lose gracefully. There were letters from lawyers. There was a pointed query to the county about the condition of the condemned structure, which the Historical Society designation quietly buried. And there was, one ugly week in early October, a survey crew that came grinding up the grade with their tripods and their stakes, and Wren walked out and met them at the property line with the deed held in one hand. The survey foreman looked for a long moment at the carved silver sign over the door, and then at the young woman standing alone beneath it with her chin up, and something moved across his weathered face. Something like shame, or like memory, or like the particular recognition that comes over an honest at the moment he is about to do a small dishonest thing for money and is suddenly handed a reason not to. He looked at his crew. Then he told them to fold up the tripods, and they went back down the mountain, and they did not come up it again. Summit Vista built its retreat somewhere else in the end, in some other valley on some other family's gate. Wren never once laid eyes on Garrett Voss again. She kept his cream business card, though, tucked into the back cover of the 12th ledger, as a small reminder of the exact kind of person that Asa's covenant had been so carefully written to defeat. A person who had always known the price of every single thing and the value of nothing at all. She stayed. Of course she stayed. She stayed through that first winter which very nearly killed her, and which she would not have traded for any other winter of her whole life. The snow came down in earnest in the third week of October, and did not finally let go of the high country until the middle of May, and at the deepest of it the way station lay buried to its eaves, a low white hump on a white mountain. Wren learned to climb up and shovel the heavy snow off the roof every week so that the load would not finally crush the patched West Bay the way it had crushed it once before. She learned to bank the great fire down low every night so that a bed of coals would still be glowing when she crawled out into the cold dark before dawn. She learned to snowshoe the 7 miles of buried dirt road, out to the turnoff once a month for supplies, hauling them back up behind her on a sled lashed with the same half-inch rope she had carried in that first day. She was entirely alone for 53 days during the deepest stretch of that winter, and she was not lonely, not even once, because the great room was full of voices now, 11 volumes of them stacked on the mantel, And through the long black evenings she read the old ledgers the way other people read scripture, slowly and twice over and aloud, sometimes just to hear the names. She used $1,340 from Asa's tin across that first year, every dollar of it for mortar and lamp oil and roofing nails and coffee, and she wrote down every single cent of it in the back pages of the 12th ledger exactly the way Asa had taught her without ever meeting her, because the money was not hers. The money belonged to the door. When the spring finally came, she rebuilt the sagging west bay of the roof properly, the way it should have been done, splitting cedar shakes by hand from a great windfall log with Asa's own froe and maul, the way he would have split them, the way men had been splitting them on that pass for more than 100 years. She rehung the heavy front door so that it swung true and latched clean, the way her own family's screen door never once had in all the years she lived behind it. She set the snow stakes out along the grade in the fall, marking the buried road for whoever might need it, exactly as the county had once paid Asa to do, though no one paid Wren a cent for it, and she never thought to ask. She pulled the grass from the old garden, and the rhubarb came back, and the horseradish came back, and the stubborn small onions came back yet again, and she planted potatoes and carrots, and a long row of sunflowers that nodded all that summer over the split-rail fence she had built back up by hand. And the travelers kept coming, more of them with every passing year, because word moves through the back country exactly the way it moves through a small town, slow and certain, and passed from one mouth to the next around a fire. Hikers and hunters and herders. A pair of school teachers on a long summer ramble who stayed 2 nights and washed every dish in the place before they left. A man walking the whole spine of the continent, north to south, who had heard from someone there was a door. And one morning in the 2nd August, an old man came slowly up the grade leading a pack horse, and Wren knew before he spoke who he had to be, because he stopped at the edge of the clearing and stood looking at the stone walls and the silvered sign for a long time without coming closer, the way a person stands at a grave. His name was Ezra, and he was 81 years old, and the last time he had stood in that clearing he had been a boy of 14, walking home from a logging camp that had cheated him of his summer's pay, and a man named Asa Hartwell had taken him in for the night and fed him and pressed $2 into his hand in the morning and sent him on. Ezra had spent 67 years meaning to come back and say thank you, and had let the years run out the way people do, and now Asa was gone and could not hear it. So Wren sat the old man down at the great trestle table where he had once sat as a hungry boy, and she fed him, and she would take nothing for it, and when he tried to press money on her at the door, the next morning she folded his hand shut around it gently and told him the same thing the book had told her 100 times over. The door does not take money. The door only takes your name. And she opened the 12th ledger and wrote it down. Ezra, come home at last, and the old man wept at the table like the boy he had been, and went on down the mountain lighter than any pack could account for. And one cold evening late in September, a woman who came over the pass at dusk with her face streaked and her shoulders shaking, who would not say where she had come from and would not say what she was running from, and whom Wren simply fed at the great table and bedded down in the warm loft, and asked not one single question of. The woman left at first light with her chin a little higher than it had been the night before. And Wren wrote her down in the 12th ledger, and beside the name, in a slanting hand she had not even known she was learning all this time, she wrote 3 words. Sent on warm. She thought often, in the quiet, about Asa Hartwell, about the man whose roof she slept beneath, who had come over that same pass in 1949 with everything he owned loaded on the back of a single horse, looking only to be left alone and quiet, and who had ended up keeping a door open for 38 years. And then somehow, for 35 more years from beyond the grave. She thought about how he had owned almost nothing in his life, and yet had protected the one thing he truly loved more fiercely and more cleverly than any rich man had ever protected a fortune. And she came to understand, slowly, across that first winter and the springs and summers that followed, that the real inheritance Asa Hartwell had left her was not the money in the tin, though the money was real, and not the building itself, though the building was solid and hers. The real inheritance was the proof, 11 volumes of proof, written out in a dead man's slanting hand, that a single ordinary person, with no power and no wealth, and nothing in the world to give but welcome, can pour kindness into strangers across a whole long quiet lifetime, and have it come back, decades on, as the exact thing that saves the place he loved. And she thought, too, about her mother. About Della Calloway, who had run a motor lodge front desk for $11 an hour and had let the whole road in through her door every single night and had never once turned away a soul who needed a room, who had raised a daughter that watched the door instead of the house, and had thought, surely, that it was only a phase. Ren understood now exactly what she had been watching the door for all those years, with her forehead pressed to the cold office glass. She had been watching for this. For the place where the road went thin and finally disappeared, and for the door standing at the end of it. And for her one chance in this world to stop being the one who is always leaving in the morning, and to become, at last, the one who holds the door open for everyone else. That is the truth about the places that pull at us, the ones we trace with a finger on a map for years and years before we ever stand inside them. They are not waiting empty for us. They are full to the rafters with everyone who loved them first. The way station was not Ren's because she had paid $5 for it at a county tax sale. It was Ren's because Asa Hartwell had paid for it first, with 38 years of open-handed welcome and one quiet act of cleverness at the very end. And because Della Calloway had paid for it too, in her own way, with $11 an hour and a door she never locked against the night. And because 100 years of freight teamsters and runaways and doctors and brides and broken men had paid for it. Every one of them, with their names written down in the book. Kindness does not vanish from the world when the person who gave it is gone. It goes down into the walls and into the ledgers and into the letters carved over the door, and it waits there, patient for as long as it has to. And when the right person finally comes walking up out of the cold, it opens to them like a spring that has never once, in 100 years, run dry. Ren Calloway was 22 years old and homeless, with $217 to her name and no one left in the world, and she spent $5 of it on a condemned Stoneway station, 11 miles from the nearest pavement, on a high pass in the mountains of Montana, under a silvered plank that read "All Welcome." It was the best $5 anyone ever spent, and every traveler who crosses Wayfarer Pass today, cold and tired and afraid, comes at last to a door that stands open, and a kettle that is hot, and a young woman who asks them for nothing, and writes down their name in the book and sends them on warm. Because that is what the door is for, and that is what she inherited, and that is the only kind of fortune in this whole world that grows larger the more of it you give away. If this story meant something to you tonight, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us down in the comments, has anyone ever kept a door open for you when you had nowhere else in the world to go? We would truly love to hear about it. We'll see you in the next one.